Welcome to the channel. With Valve announcing a bunch of new products, they're announcing a new VR headset. They have a new controller coming up for grabs early next year, and they have the Steam machine, well, the second Steam machine, which is going to be a Steam running PC that you can hook into your monitor or TV or what have you. But with all that new stuff on the horizon, we're actually going to talk about old stuff today. This is the LCD Steam Deck, and if you haven't gotten into PC gaming on handhelds, one thing you might wonder is if you look at things like the Legion Go 2, the Xbox Ally X, those are kind of pricey devices, assuming you can even get one these days. You might wonder, is something like the Steam Deck enough for getting into PC gaming on handhelds here near the end of 2025? Well, we have the essentially cheapest Steam Deck you can buy here, and we're going to take a look at it and see how well this thing holds up, even though Steam Deck has been out for a couple of years. Would this be worth getting if you're looking into possibly getting into handhelds on PC without messing with too much money? So let's check it out. First off, specs. So the Steam Deck uses a kind of custom AMD chip that Valve had put into this thing, and it is not super impressive by current standards. The AMD Z1 Extreme and the certainly the Z2 Extreme are both kind of outclass this. But the thing is, it has a decent amount of power to play a lot of games. Now, you're not going to play Borderlands 4 at high frame rates or anything like that, but there are a lot of games on Steam out there that run pretty darn well on the Steam Deck. So, not the fastest processor in the world by any means these days, but it can run a lot. So you get 16 gigs of RAM, you get a 7-inch LCD screen, up to 60 hertz, and it's an 800p screen, so 1280 by 800, the 16 by 10 aspect ratio, which is actually pretty nice. Now, the LCD Steam Deck used to come in a variety of different storages when it was the fancier one, but these days you just get 256 gigs of internal storage. You can also expand fairly easily. If you don't want to take the Steam Deck apart, you can take the deck apart and change out the SSD, but if you don't feel like doing that, you can certainly just add a micro SD card. Now, you may not want to put super demanding games on the micro SD card, but it actually can run quite a good bit off of the micro SD card without too many drawbacks. So you can just slap a terabyte micro SD in here if you're so inclined, and you don't feel like opening the deck up. Of course, the Steam Deck runs SteamOS, and that makes it, and we'll do a little demonstration here, but it makes it a lot like a console, as opposed to, oh, this is just a handheld PC running Windows, and you have to deal with what would be a mouse and keyboard focused system. Pretty much everything here is accessible using the handheld control. Now, one limitation, I guess, of the older deck, it's got a 40 watt hour battery, which, depending on your game, if you're playing something that's really more challenging to run, you're looking at maybe 2 hours of battery life with this. But if you're playing lighter stuff, you can get substantially more, particularly if you're doing things like emulation, and you can run at 7 watts. You can run this thing for hours. Now, depending on what you're used to holding, 1.5 pounds may seem heavy, may seem light. Of course, it's substantially heavier than like a phone or a smaller tablet, but 680 grams is not on the super heavy side for PC handhelds. This is not something like the Legion Go 2, which the Legion Go, even the original one's kind of like holding a brick in your hand in terms of weight. So, not the heaviest, not the lightest device, but probably on the lighter end for the bigger PC handheld. Now, of course, the reason we're talking about this is the Steam Deck these days is probably the most affordable way to get into PC gaming on handhelds. You can't really buy anything mainstream that is cheaper than a Steam Deck. Valve recently had these on sale for $319 on their website, and they'll probably be on sale again. Black Friday coming up. If you just want to straight up buy one from Valve, it's $399 at the moment, but Steam Deck's been out a while. You can also look for some used deals, but suffice it to say, if you want to try out PC gaming on a handheld and you don't want to spend a whole lot of money, the Steam Deck LCD is probably the absolute cheapest way you can check out and see if it's for you. And if it is, you can probably use the Steam Deck for a while without feeling like you need to upgrade, unless you want to play certain rather heavy games. We'll demonstrate a few games on here, but certainly for lighter games and older games, you might not feel the need to upgrade for a while. So, Steam Deck specs. So let's just take a look at the deck itself. Initially, say, how big is it? How big is the Steam Deck? Well, here's a PlayStation 5 controller, and it's a bit bigger than a PlayStation 5 controller. It's basically like a PlayStation 5 controller with some extra wings. So, thickness, again, a little bit like a PlayStation 5 controller in terms of thickness. Of course, it's just larger in general because it's big and flat because it has to accommodate the screen. But this is not the biggest PC handheld out there. It's not the smallest either, but it's one of the smallest. It's probably the smallest mainstream PC handheld you can actually get. Now, in terms of controls, you have trackpads, which you can set to do all kinds of stuff. You've got the analog sticks here, you've got a D-pad, the usual buttons, and you have dedicated Steam buttons and buttons to change quick settings. Also, of course, volume controls. You actually have 4 programmable buttons on the back, which is nice for PC games that like to have, say, additional keyboard combinations in addition to being able to be played with a controller. So you can set these up. You can pretty much define these to whatever you want. So if you're playing a game that seems to need too many buttons, more than you have on here, then you can certainly redefine the trackpad. You can redefine the buttons on the back to do pretty much anything you would want. Now, when I first looked at the Steam Deck, I thought there was no way this would be comfortable. But turns out this is probably, if not the most, probably the second most comfortable large handheld, things that are bigger than like a Nintendo Switch, that you can actually get. Valve actually did pretty well with the ergonomics on here. It feels good in the hand. The controls are easily accessible. And you can actually hold this for a while. I was actually very surprised. I finally bit the bullet and got a Steam Deck, and it's like, oh, I don't know if this will be comfortable or not, but it really does feel good in the hand. So congratulations, Valve. You did a good job with the ergonomics on this device. Much better to hold than, say, the Asus Ally, at least the one that's not the Xbox model, and certainly nicer hold than something like the original Legion Go. So, pretty good in the hand. Actually, I find this more comfortable to hold than my original Nintendo Switch. I never found the Switch all that comfortable. This actually fits in the hand pretty well. So, even though it's heavier compared to like an Android handheld or, just like an original Switch or Switch Lite, it does feel good in the hand. If you're skeptical, see if you can find somebody that has one of these, and just hold on to it for a bit. And it really does, get comfortable. Yeah. Of course, one of the big things about gaming on PC on a handheld is oftentimes you have to deal with Windows. And I'm not going to say, oh, Windows is complete trash and all that. But the issue is Windows is not really designed for handhelds. Even the new Xbox full screen experience is still kind of janky, and And when I do a video on the Xbox Ally X, you'll see what I mean. But Steam is just, on the Steam Deck, it's just like it's designed for this. So it's like you're holding an actual console rather than a PC. So everything is easy to find. Everything works with just using the menus. You can navigate around this thing very easily. You can install games. You can download games off the store. As long as your stuff is on Steam, the interface is just great. Usually what I do is I have it set to just show my library and what I have installed here. But I can take any of these games that I have here and aren't currently installed, and I can just stick them on the deck if I have some storage room. And of course, since everything is on Steam here, most of these have cloud save. So if you want to switch back and forth between your handheld and your main PC, then all of your save data is there. It's easily accessible, so it's just like, oh, I'm going to put down my game on my Steam Deck, pick it right up on my desktop PC without losing anything at all. So, very nice interface. You can click on a game and tell you about, all the usual Steam stuff, but everything here works well with the controller, which is the important thing. You have adjustments, if you want to change the setting of a particular game, so you can actually change performance settings here. You can look at setting frame limits for games that might not be able to run at 60 frames per second on a handheld like the Steam Deck. You have options to kind of tweak, and these can actually be, you can't see it right now because I'm not in a game, but you can actually have a separate profile for each game with all the settings that you want here. So, it's a really nice, really well thought out interface for a handheld PC. It's, at the moment, the Steam Deck interface is probably the absolute best handheld PC interface that you can get. So, there's various attempts to make something usable on various Windows handhelds, like Microsoft's getting into it with the full screen experience. But having used both for a while, the full screen experience doesn't hold a candle to SteamOS in terms of usability. Now, there are some things that don't work quite as well on the deck as we might hope. For example, if you're into other game stores, if you're into buying stuff off the Microsoft Store, if you're into the Epic Store, those don't work as smoothly as games from Steam. But, given that Steam is kind of the big boy here on PC online game stores, I personally didn't find that too difficult. But you can add things that will let you allow your Epic games or GOG or what have you to be installed on the deck. It's just not as seamless as it is with just native Steam games. I tend to just put emulators and native Steam games on my deck, just because that's usually what I want to play anyway. So, really nice interface to work with. Basically, it's just, here are your games, let's play. Now, again, there's a lot of configuration you can do. You can actually change, all these different settings. You can actually change controller settings for different games. You can bring up, of course, since it's a PC, you occasionally need a keyboard with some games. There's an on-screen keyboard you can bring up. And, you can do little things like customize your startup movie and whatnot. But there's a lot of stuff you can do here. There's, of course, social features, the usual Steam client stuff, which I don't tend to use that much. I tend to do most of my gaming offline. But, it's certainly there if you want it. About the only online things you might have trouble with, maybe with the Steam Deck, would be certain games with kernel-level anti-cheat that just don't run on the deck because the deck doesn't run Windows. And that's more on the game manufacturer than the deck. But it is something to be aware of if you're looking to play a certain game, and it's an online multiplayer competitive one. Of course, there's something to be said for not playing a lot of online multiplayer competitive games with a controller, but that would be a topic for a different video. So, really nice interface here for the Steam Deck. Let's take a look at some gameplay footage here on the LCD Steam Deck. I have about a little bit over 30 minutes of gameplay footage for various different games, some older, some newer, running on the deck here. And just want to remind you, if you don't want to watch 30 minutes of gameplay footage, one right after the other, I've got some timestamps in the description down below. You can just fast forward to the game you're interested in, or just fast forward to the conclusions at the end of the video, talking about the pros and cons of the LCD Steam Deck. But for now, let's get on to the gameplay footage. If you've watched this channel for a bit, you probably knew this was coming, since we said we were going to start playing some games. This is kind of an old channel favorite. This is Star Ocean Till the End of Time from the PlayStation 2, running on the PCSX2 emulator. I've got PCSX2 set up to as 2 times native PS2 resolution, which is appropriate for the resolution of the screen we have here. I also have the Steam Deck set to a lower power mode. So we've gone into the performance settings here. I have some performance settings for PCSX2. So I've got some just custom settings here. Mainly what I did was I bumped down, I put the performance overlay up here so you guys can see, are we getting much frame rate stutter or anything like that. But I put the power limit to 8 watts here, which may actually be a little bit overkill, but lowering the power limit here, lowering the TDP, can actually increase your battery life by a good bit. Well, we lost the light temporarily, but got it plugged back in. So, guess I can blame the cat. But we have this set to 8 watts, so we can basically increase the battery life for playing emulated games here. And in fact, if you're just running a light PC game, then you can get some extended battery life as well. So we're only using, and I should probably unplug this. So at the moment, we're only using about, I set it to 8 watts. It is probably going to end up using that for the game, but we'll see as we play what the remaining time left on the battery is going to be. So I'm using 8 watts. I've actually played PlayStation 2 games on the Steam Deck as low as about 4 watts. Just depends on the game. But I figured, hey, here I'm trying to not really have any stuttering or other issues. So what we'll do is we'll turn the sound on, and we'll run around and get into some battles. Oh, we're in luck.
You don't really want to mess with us.
I just missed.
Death awaits the overconfident. Remember that.
Give me a break. Not good. Hammer of fight. Spear myself. I'd have preferred a more worthy opponent.
We'll go into one of these harder battles over here and see if we get more effects going on.
Like a good fight.
Moron, know your enemy before you strike the first blow.
What? An attack from behind?
That's how it's gonna be, huh?
Death awaits the overconfident. Remember that.
So that's probably enough Star Ocean till the end of time for now. You can get a good idea of the fact that it's performing just fine. This is the NTSC version of the game, so it should be running at 60 frames per second. And that's pretty much what we're getting. And I didn't see any red back here, at least. I have the PCSX2 performance meter back there in the back. But you can see this game runs pretty well, and I could probably lower the TDP down another couple of watts. But as it is, you know, we're gonna run probably close to 5 hours with the deck at these settings. So not too bad if you're looking to do some emulation, because the deck you can set down the TDP really easily, and you can extend the battery life a lot more than you think you might be able to. So let's look at some native PC games rather than just emulation. Next, we will test a native PC game. Let's start off with Borderlands 2, kind of another channel favorite here. And it's not already running. I just wanted to show you the experience of launching a game on the Steam Deck. So Borderlands 2 is actually listed as what they say is playable, which means that essentially there's something that's not necessarily quite perfect about how the game runs on the deck. In this case, it's just the very beginning of the game where the launcher is. And you'll see that when we launch the game. So I'm going to go ahead and launch Borderlands 2. You'll see it said what controls it wanted to use, which of course can be changed if you feel like doing that. So this little launcher here doesn't really support the controls. So instead of tapping on a button, I just need to literally tap on the screen where it says play. So PC games being what they are, sometimes they have little quirks like that. Right now, we just wait for it to load. So being an older game, you know, a lot of the brand new games are not necessarily going to run at 60 frames per second on the Steam Deck, but Borderlands 2 should have no real trouble running at 60 frames per second on the Steam Deck. So as far as settings go for this game, I basically have the deck at full power this time. I don't have a TDP limit on there, so basically the deck is in 15 watt mode. So I'll unplug it and we'll see what kind of battery life estimate we get off of this thing once we get going into the game. Of course you can see the game's pretty smooth here, at least I hope you can see it on this camera. But of course this is just the menu, so let's actually go into the game. And go shoot some stuff.
Take the shot, babe. Ready to go again, huh?
My bad shot today because I'm holding this at an off angle for the camera. I'd normally hold this so it was facing head on to my eyes, but the things we do for filming.
Finally, some murder.
Want me?
Not it, just to me.
You ready to blow the tree? Go on, take a hard look. Oh, I love the way you kill.
My mommy is so mad.
Like what you see.
We're getting our fault.
No happy ending for them. Take the shot, babe. You really blew them away. Packing some real heat there.
So as you can see here, an older game like Borderlands 2, you're going to have no trouble with at all playing at, well, as high a frame rate as you can get on the OLED deck. Oh, sorry, on the LCD deck. If you want to play your little Borderlands 2, it's going to be a pretty nice experience on the original Steam Deck LCD.
Feeling overburdened by money? Lovely. Remember, we're always open.
Okay, so I think we will load up another game and see how the deck does with something that's at least a little bit newer. So let's take a look at Borderlands 3 on the Steam Deck. So the setup here is I have this. Normally I've actually been playing this set to 30 frames per second frame limit, but I set it to 45 this time just to see how well that would go. And the main thing is we don't have a TDP limit, so we're running at full power here. And we're running at, of course, 1280 by 800 resolution in the game. Mostly low settings for Borderlands 3. And we will see how the Steam Deck LCD handles this. Oh, one other thing I should mention. Because this game is so huge, and this is only a 256 gigabyte Steam Deck, what I have done is I have Borderlands 3 installed on the micro SD card instead. Now, that will generally increase the load times a bit, but it's at least worthwhile seeing, okay, this is a big game. This is a more modern game than Borderlands 2. How is it going to perform running off the micro SD card on this handheld? So let's get into games. Now, one thing that you probably end up noticing with the micro SD card is this bit takes a little bit longer. So the loading screen, you're going to be watching that for a bit longer here. Now notice the estimated battery life is quite a bit lower here for a big heavy game like Borderlands 3 than it was for even Borderlands 2 or PS2 emulation. Sanctuary is one of the hardest parts of the game to actually run at a good frame rate. You can kind of see, at least on initial load, it's a little stuttery here because, again, it's probably reading stuff off of the micro SD card. So, partly why I set it at 30 frames per second on this normally, but you can see it's getting into the 40s here. And again, I'm sure it's spooling some stuff off the micro SD right now. But let's actually get out of Sanctuary and get in some actual combat and see how we do there. So we'll head over to Joey's planet and go visit the cartel hideout. Again, I'll apologize for my aim because, like with Borderlands 2, I'm holding this at an odd angle for me. So I'm looking at the screen kind of diagonally so you guys can see it straight on the camera. Yeah, so the textures streaming in are a little slower than it would be if I had it installed on internal storage. Let's go shoot some stuff. Let's get a bunch of stuff flying around the screen. As I expected, it's not going to hold 45 frames per second with a whole bunch of stuff going on. But, like I said, I usually cap this at 30, and I think part of it is the fact that I'm running it off the micro SD. But I'm doing that for this particular device because Borderlands 3 would literally take up more than half of my internal storage if I put it on there. Now, of course, you can add, or you can replace the SSD in here, but I figured, I'm just not going to worry about it, and I'll put the games on the micro SD card instead, some of the big ones. Ooh, level 69. Let's at least get to mini boss here. Oh, I hate these things. Just because they're annoying. They have that little shield. Alright, boss has showed up. Have some grenades.
Your parents shall be ashamed of you.
May they bring you many kills.
So, here's some Borderlands 3. Interestingly enough, running off of the micro SD card instead of the internal storage. So, my little SanDisk Extreme down here. And you can see we get pretty good performance on this. I mean, I have it limited to 45 because, I think realistically running it off the micro SD, I probably should just set the frame limit to 30 frames per second. But 45 is actually working well enough here. It doesn't quite hold that when I have a ton of grenades flying and all the lighting effects and all that going off. But it's actually putting up... Actually, I was surprised. I thought it would perform worse than it did. But you can certainly play some Borderlands 3 on the go. Now, not for too long, though, because you're going to definitely be using more battery up here. Notice now it's pulling almost 20 watts total off of the battery. So we're not getting 5, 6, 7 hours of Borderlands 3 gameplay out of the Steam Deck LCD. There are some things that the Steam Deck will not do well, and this is one of them. This is Borderlands 4. Now, to be fair, not much does Borderlands 4 very well, but I've got it set up to have a frame limit of 30 frames per second, but we are probably not hitting that very much anyway. As you can see, we're using a lot of power here just to stand here in this room. I don't really recommend seriously trying to play Borderlands 4 on the Steam Deck, unless you're streaming, but we're going to try it anyway, just for the heck of it. Now, I'm not using frame generation or anything. I'm not using that in any of the gameplay footage here. But I would not recommend using frame generation for Borderlands 4 on the Steam Deck anyway. I think it would be completely unplayable. Not that this is particularly playable. I mean, we're getting 20 frames per second here, but we can try to play it.
Has anybody seen my other gun? Like a really big one.
You're a mean one, aren't you? Oy, that's all right. I mean too. Hasta nunca.
I would say this is definitely not the optimal Borderlands 4 experience here. It is running, though. A little harder to aim than it should be because the frame rate is only about 20 frames per second right now.
Move it into range! Using nade!
Cheap and deadly. Somebody wants pain. Some punch me.
Oh, the nasty little...
Put it right on of us.
It's like they know I'm trying to play on the Steam Deck, and they've spawned more enemies here than usual.
Make room for the boom. Now I'm mad. Don't make me laugh. I hurt myself. Oh, that's me. Away. What pain? Too many shakes. Arm.
That's probably enough of that. Let's get out of here. This kind of reminds me of playing Borderlands 2 on the PlayStation Vita.
Load him up and let him fly.
So I think that gives you a good idea of what sort of performance you can expect from Borderlands 4 on the Steam Deck LCD, which is not a whole lot. So let's actually play something maybe a little more suited to the Steam Deck than Borderlands 4 next. So here's Persona 3 Reload. Didn't do anything special for the configuration here. I just have it at the default settings, which is 15 watts. No frame rate limits or anything like that, at least on the Steam Deck itself. So let's see how this goes. This is from fairly early in the game, but just late enough in the game to have some combat.
All right.
So, it's the real deal from here on, huh?
Looks easy to get lost in.
Can you all hear me?
Whoa! Is that you, Senpai?
I'll be providing audio backup from here on out. Keep that in mind.
Wait, are you saying you can see this place from all the way out there?
It's my persona's ability. The structure of Tartarus actually changes from day to day. I'd like to join you up there, but we need someone to provide outside support.
That's even more concerning.
Now, based on your current location, you can expect to encounter enemies at any time. They shouldn't be too tough, but proceed with caution. You'll get the hang of it as you go.
Right.
Got it. Why is she always like that?
Right. Let's begin. Defeat all... I'll support you as much as I can, but it's up to you to learn something out there. This is the first real battle for Takeba and... All right. When faced with... The second option is... Knowing how personas work...
What to do?
Orpheus!
Okay, looks like I'm up. Here goes. Check this out. Persona! Oh yeah! How'd you like my...
Yeah.
Well done, Iori. Takeba too.
Got it.
Good. Let's continue exploring. Another... All right. Most enemies have an elemental affinity. Not only that, knocking down an...
Weaknesses, huh?
Wait! Just point it to my head, then pull the trigger. I can do this! Persona! Focus?
Whoa, you're not so bad yourself, Yucatan.
That's it, Takeba. You give it a try.
I'll go with
Orpheus!
Well, keep that up.
Persona.
Fantastic.
Totally.
Can you try not being a creep?
Great. Looks like everyone's gotten used to handling their leader. I can still say...
Yeah.
Sometimes...
Oh, hell yeah!
That looks like it'll be...
That's probably enough Persona 3 so you can get an idea of how well it runs. So you won't have trouble playing even more modern games like the Persona 3 remake on the Steam Deck. Just stay away from stuff like really heavy stuff like Borderlands 4. So one thing that the Steam Deck really excels at, I think, is indie games. So let's at least look at one of those before we wrap this video up. I'm not even sure how you're supposed to say this, but let's look at Ball Pit, Ball X Pit, however you're supposed to say it. We'll call it Ball Pit. And as you might expect, hopefully this one will run pretty well on the Steam Deck LCD. just picked these two because they shoot a lot of balls. Probably won't do a whole round because that'll make the video too long. Probably already long enough as it is. Yeah, that's probably enough ball pit. So you can see the deck handles indies like ball pit with no problems whatsoever. I could probably, I haven't actually messed with any of the settings on the deck for this one. Could probably turn down the TDP a bit and save some battery life here. But I just haven't messed with doing it yet because I just got this game a little bit ago. So we've seen a whole bunch of game demos here on the original LCD Steam Deck. So let's come back and have some talk about some pros and cons of the Steam Deck LCD. So let's talk a little bit about the pros and cons of the original LCD Steam Deck in 2025, or specifically in late 2025. So Steam Deck has some pretty good advantages. You know, you can greatly increase the battery life of the Steam Deck LCD, particularly the Steam Deck OLED if you go for that. But you can very easily turn down the power consumption for this device if you want to. Now, some games you're going to not be able to do that just because, you know, you need the power to actually run the game. But for light games and emulation, you can basically just crank down the power all the way down to 3 watts if you got some really, really light stuff. And you can really stretch out the battery life of the deck. And you can do that on other PC handhelds as well to some extent, but it's just kind of built into the way the deck works. It's really easy to access. A lot of the other handhelds have a convoluted way of using anything other than their preset power modes, and the deck doesn't have that. The deck says, yo, you want to turn down the power? Go right ahead. Now, another big pro, I think, for the deck here is the software experience. SteamOS is a really console-like experience. Most things just work, and if you've dealt with setting up Windows for gaming and Windows handhelds for gaming, you know, it might not seem like as big of a deal as it is, but SteamOS is generally an excellent experience, certainly compared to Windows. It's pretty close to what you would get on a console. There still is some tweaking that you might have to do depending on what exactly you're trying to run on this. You know, if you're running non-Steam applications, you're going to be doing more tweaking. But, you know, at least for the Steam Deck, everything is generally easy to find on the internet. If you want to do something with the Steam Deck, you can look it up, and somebody's probably done it, has a guide ready for you to be able to do that thing. But in general, if you don't want to tweak the Steam Deck, you don't really have to, other than maybe changing the power levels to increase your battery life. A whole lot of tweaking is not necessary, unlike, you know, typical Windows handhelds or Windows desktops for that matter. Another thing that might seem like a small thing, but isn't if you've dealt with Windows handhelds, is Suspend. Suspend actually works. On my Windows handhelds, I generally just shut them down with if I'm done with the game and just fresh boot them every time I want to use them, because half the time Suspend doesn't work. And particularly if you try to suspend during a game. By and large, even if I'm in the middle of a game, I can just hit the power button and have the Steam Deck go into suspend and I'm fine. You know, if you're currently in an online game, it might make a bigger difference. But, you know, if I'm playing offline, I can just turn the thing off at the power switch, come back later, my game's still loaded, and it's still probably going to work. And I don't really feel like I have to shut down the Steam Deck unless I just want to. You know, if I'm going to be storing it for a bit and not playing it, of course I'm going to want to shut it down to maximize battery life. But the suspend feature actually works properly. And it makes it way more friendly to use if you're just I want to play a game for a bit. I'll set the Steam Deck down, come back to it later, and not have to go through the fuss of, oh, let me boot up the console, let me boot up the handheld, let me load the game. Some games take a while to load, but you don't really have to do that on the Steam Deck unless you really want to. Suspend actually working is kind of a huge perk of the deck over a lot of PC handhelds. Now, of course, if you go away from Windows, if you install some alternate operating systems, it's less of a pro. But certainly, if you're comparing to Windows, Suspend actually working is a huge deal. Also, the deck, even though it's been out for a couple of years now, still gets regular support and updates. Unlike devices by, say, Lenovo, who might put out an update once a year, Valve regularly updates even the oldest Steam Decks. So, you can expect if there are software quirks, they'll generally be worked out. They for example, now this should have been in here for a long time, really, but they added a feature, for example, to download in the background with the screen off. Now, on an LCD deck, it doesn't matter that much except for power usage. But when the OLED came out, you don't necessarily want to leave an OLED on a downloading screen for, depending on how long it's going to take for your stuff to download over Wi-Fi. But they're continually adding stuff, and that's kind of nice to have actual support, unlike some of these handheld manufacturers that just kind of pump out a device and just say, oh yeah, that's out now, we're on to the next thing, we're not going to support this. You get some good support from Valve. Now, I don't have it on the slide, but given the current environment with tariffs and all that, most PC handhelds have gone up in price. The deck's still under $400, just under $400 if it's not on sale. But if you get a refurb or just the sale, which, when they put these on sale, they basically go on sale new for the refurb price, which is just over $300, which is far cheaper than you can get pretty much any of the deck's competitors. So if you're looking at getting into PC handhelds without spending a lot of money, Steam Deck is probably going to be your best option, particularly if you're not comfortable with buying devices like this used. Now, of course, there are cons. There are always cons for things, right? So, in particular, I think the screen quality of the deck, at least the LCD deck, is probably maybe its weakest point. I don't find the screen to be actually bad. I mean, it actually looks better off camera than it does on camera, but it looks all right on camera here in these videos. But, the Steam Deck LCD can only hit a maximum of 60 FPS because it's a 60 hertz screen. So even if the deck had enough power to run your game higher than that, for something like Silksong, the deck could easily hit higher than 60 frames per second, a lot of the indie games, but the screen is just not there to handle that. And I guess it makes sense if you're playing mostly heavier PC games, you're going to be looking at playing between 30 and 60 frames per second anyway. But, the LCD screen, it's a lower refresh rate. It's 1280 by 800, which is relatively low resolution, although it makes sense for a lower powered device like the Steam Deck to not just have a super high resolution screen without the horsepower to be able to drive it most of the time. Now, again, we could talk about Lenovo with the original Legion Go. It has a beautiful high resolution screen, but you pretty much can't play any games at that resolution because the processor's not that strong to run a lot of modern games at the resolution of the screen. So you have less of that with the deck because I guess they figured, well, with the level of hardware we got in here, 1280 by 800 is fine. And it is fine most of the time, but it is lower resolution than most of the competitors. You look at your Ally, for instance, that's a 1080p screen instead of 800p. So, that I would consider that a drawback. And if you're concerned about screen quality, though, and you like the rest of the deck, the OLED deck, despite being the same resolution, it's actually a little bit bigger screen, and it's higher refresh, and of course, it's OLED. So it looks great, but costs a couple $100 more. So if you're still interested in not breaking the budget, well, the LCD is probably good enough, but this is a drawback, the screen quality compared to a lot of the competitors in this space, all of which are more expensive than the deck, but there you go. In addition, the power level. One nice thing about the deck is you can set it to lower power levels, but it maxes out at 15 watts, and running at 15 watts is just not powerful enough for a lot of games. I mean, you saw it in the gameplay videos. If you watched through the videos and didn't just skip to the end, this thing can't run Borderlands 4 or games that are heavy like that. So really heavy games, you're gonna just not find the performance there on the Steam Deck. Although I don't think it's really meant to play the heaviest games out there. It's more tilted towards indies, older games, and lighter modern games. I mean, the Persona remake ran fine on here. And, Borderlands 3 actually ran pretty good. And it was considered a heavy game back in the day. But, some of the brand new stuff, if it's really demanding, you aren't going to be able to run it on the deck. You might be able to stream it from a PC, but, being an older system, being just designed to run at a lower power, kind of limits it for some of the heavier games. And also, this is more of an operating system issue rather than a hardware issue, but there are some games that won't run on the Steam Deck or on other handhelds running anything other than Windows just because of kernel-level anti-cheat systems. So if you're heavily into some online competitive games, you might want to check and see if they actually work on the Steam Deck before you actually make a purchase if you're going to get one. Me, I'm not really into online competitive games at all, so this is a complete non-issue for me. But, for some games, the anti-cheat just won't work with the deck. This is not the fault of Steam or Valve or whatnot per se. It's just the game developers just chose to use an anti-cheat that they haven't made run on Linux yet, or they just haven't enabled it to run on Linux. So there are some compatibility issues with some anti-cheat system. There are also some games that just don't run on the Steam Deck because of compatibility, but those are actually fairly few and far between. I think the only game that I have that, for whatever reason, I don't think runs on the deck at all. I mean, I wouldn't want to run Borderlands 4 on the deck, but a game that I don't think run at all, I think is Star Ocean: The Last Hope. I don't think for whatever reason that game runs on the deck, although the Divine Force does. But, that Last Hope remake, for whatever reason, is marked as deck incompatible. Maybe it does run okay, I just haven't tried it. But I was just looking through the list of my games to see, okay, well, what might not really run on the deck? And that one popped up as, oh, well, this is not supposed to run. So maybe a few compatibility problems, but a lot of that's pretty much ironed out. You can generally, and Valve tells you whether the games are, how compatible the games are, but generally most of the stuff you find on Steam will work to some extent on the deck. After all that, what do I think about the Steam Deck LCD here in, as I'm filming this video, November of 2025? Well, I think it's definitely a good value for your money. If you're looking at getting into PC handhelds at this point, you're just not sure, particularly since everything's gone up in price, thanks to tariffs and all that other good stuff. If you're not quite sure, Steam Deck you can get, and I'm pretty sure Valve will probably put this on sale again around Black Friday. I mean, I'd be surprised if they didn't. So something you can pick up for relatively little money, certainly compared to the competitors. And, it works well. Don't go in expecting to run really heavy stuff. But if you are okay with that, and maybe you have a PC already that can run some of the heavy stuff, you can just stream to the deck if you would like to just play your games like, in the bedroom or somewhere else around the house. But if you want to take the device outside, don't expect to run the heavy games, but the light stuff I've got here, didn't show a demo video of this one, but this is the original Borderlands Game of the Year edition, the remake that made run a little bit more like Borderlands 2 with the mini map. But this works fine. I mean, I have it on medium settings. It runs at steady 60 frames per second, which is all you can display on the deck screen anyway. And the only takes up about 17 watts total, so it runs for a while. It's been sitting here since I've been filming. I got 83% battery, 2 hours of battery life left, roughly. So, you can play outside for a while as long as you're running relatively light stuff. So, I'm actually really impressed that the deck does as well as it does at this time. I got a lot of games I could run on it. It runs most of what I want to run pretty well. And it's inexpensive. I mean, what more can you say? So, if you already know you want to be into PC handhelds, you want something more powerful, then of course you can buy something other than the Steam Deck. But I think this is definitely a good device to get your feet wet in PC handheld. I don't think you can really do better at this point. I mean, you can look for a used Ally, but those are harder to find, in good condition, and cheap. So, you can find a used Ally for maybe the same price as a new deck, but, you may end up having to replace the joysticks, or the micro SD port might be dead or something like that. So, I still recommend the deck, either version, at the end of 2025 if you're looking for a starter PC handheld, or you're just looking for something that's well put together and will be a good software experience. So, that's my thoughts on the Steam Deck LCD model in late 2025. If you enjoyed the video, please leave me a like. It helps other people find my videos in whatever YouTube uses as a search algorithm these days. If you'd like to see more handheld gaming content, not just PC, but Android and other devices as well, then subscribe to the channel. And I hope you enjoyed the video, as always, and I hope to see you around for the next one.